Hey gang, what's up? Welcome back here to another edition of Intuitive Angling. And man, I really appreciate everybody taking some time out of your day to watch the video. Never take that for granted. And got some more story time for you guys today, backed by popular demand. Yesterday or 2 days ago, I did a video on some of the worst times I've ever gotten stuck. And that got like 40,000 views in 2 days. So people were requesting more stories. So today, I'm going to tell you about the biggest waves I've ever been in my bass boat before. 2 or 3 situations. I've been in a lot of them, but I'll relay a couple of stories you guys might find interesting there. And real quick, guys, before we get started, just a couple quick housekeeping tips. You guys know I'm working with Boatworks and Baitworks here in Springfield. If you guys are looking for the best tackle store in the world, online or physical store, both, I'll include the Baitworks link in the description. They got every type of tackle, rod and reel, fishing equipment you could possibly want, and you can check them out on their online store. You can also get your block of old school jigs there, and also I'll include the Boatworks link in the description. If you guys are interested in, a skeeter boat, Camus, Bass Cat, Express, they got them all there, so much appreciated on that. Okay, guys, over the last 50 years, man, I've been in a ton of giant water before. A lot of people don't. I've done a couple of videos on all this on the past, and when I relate some stories to about how big of waves I've been in, inevitably I get a couple guys that say, I don't believe that. You don't know what a big wave is, or what you're thinking is a 5-foot wave. What you're thinking is an 8-foot wave is a 4-foot wave. I hear it all the time. But guys, I know what a big wave is. I know how big waves are. I know the height of waves. So I can assure you I've been in more than most people that are watching this video. Unless you fish the Great Lakes every day, I've probably been in bigger water than anyone else watching this video, as a lot of the touring pros. If you're a touring pro and you have fished the Great Lakes and all over the country for the past 35 years like I have, you have definitely experienced some of this too. So what I'm going to do, guys, I'm going to tell you about 3 memorable trips, or 3 memorable days I have had in giant waves before. And I've had a lot more than that. These are just ones that stand out, but I've had a lot of days on the water in 5 to 10 foot waves before, and primarily in the Great Lakes. So I'll tell you about 2 of the biggest waves I've ever been in, and then I'm going to tell you about the most dangerous wave I've ever been in, which wasn't on the Great Lake. The two biggest times, or the 2 biggest situations I've been in with the biggest giant waves were in the Great Lakes. One on Lake Erie, one on Lake Ontario, and the most dangerous waves I've ever been in was actually on Lake Murray in South Carolina, if you believe it or not. So I'm going to tell you all those stories. So first of all, let's talk about the biggest waves I've ever seen and been in a bass boat in my life. I was coming back from a tournament, and I think I told this story back when I first started the channel like 2 years ago, so I don't even know if that video is up anymore, but I was going to relay it because we've got a lot more people that haven't seen it by now. But anyway, I was coming back from an FLW tournament about, this has probably been close to 15 years ago now. We were at a FLW tournament up at Lake Champlain, and I was coming back to Missouri, and we made it through to Erie, Pennsylvania, to spend the night there, and got into town about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the wind was howling. There was high wind warnings for the lake. The wind was blowing anywhere between 35 to 50 miles an hour, gusts to 50, but it was blowing pretty consistently about 40. It was freaking getting it. So we stayed. I got a little motel there right on the shores of Lake Erie, right by a little marina there. And I just got sort of a wild hair, and I just said, I want to see what that's like. I just want to experience what Lake Erie is like in a 40 mile an hour wind, because I'd been in it in 20, maybe 25 mile an hour winds, and it was freaking, they were giant and 20 mile an hour winds. I just couldn't imagine 40. So anyway, I launched my boat, and one of the things I'll tell you about rough water, guys, it's a lot of bass boats. If you're in a 21 foot bass boat, a modern bass boat, most all of them are quality boats. So when you're in that type of giant water, it's not the boat as much as it is the driver and being able to read the water that's going to keep you safe or not. But anyway, I launched the boat out there, and I took out. It was on the south side of Lake Erie, and the wind was blowing straight from the west, super hard. And I started going out there, like 25 miles an hour, and they were rolling, but they were just like 4 to 6 footers, but they were wide apart. And I got out there probably about, I'm gonna guess, seemed like it was about a mile, maybe 3/4 of a mile off the bank. Yeah, well, probably 3/4 of a mile. And they started building, and they started getting bigger. And all of a sudden, it's like as I got out there, maybe about 1.5 miles, 2 miles out into the lake, I guess I hit the deeper part of the lake or something like that. And all of a sudden, these waves were freaking giant. I mean, I had never seen anything like this in my life. And it's like I don't even know how big they were. They were like, when you were down in the trough of one of them, it looked like you were looking up on a mountain. I mean, I have got to say they were at least 15 feet tall. And when I'm saying 15 feet tall, a lot of you guys are going to say, "Oh, I'm calling BS on you, Randy." When I'm saying they're 15 feet tall, I'm talking about they were spaced wide apart. So they were like, they were so far apart that they were rolling, but they weren't breaking off. They weren't breaking over like on the top of the wave. It was like a giant roller. So I was going through them almost like through the troughs, almost like at a 45, where I'd come down the trough and I'd climb up the wave and I'd go down the other side of it like that. And they were rounded and they were wide enough apart where you could go up and down over them like that. And eventually, when I did that for probably 3 or 4 minutes, and then when I looked out in front of me, I started seeing them breaking over the top. And I didn't want any part of that, because I knew if they were breaking over on the top, that would be super dangerous. That could flip you over. So at that point, I turned it around. But like I said, I am completely confident those were 15 feet class waves. And that's, just from being in the top of them and looking up like that, you can judge it pretty good. But it was the most exhilarating experience I've ever felt in my life. It was like, you talk about something that will make you feel alive and make you be impressed with the power of nature. When you're out there 2 miles out into Lake Erie in weather that has sunk ocean going ships before, I mean, I'm glad I did it. I mean, I didn't feel like I was in danger at any time. I mean, I felt like I was in complete control of it. I did feel like if I went out any further and I got into the breakers, that would be stupid. So that's when I did turn it around at that point. But I loved it. I thought it was the greatest thing in the world. So that was the first one. The second one was, and these waves were big, but they weren't quite as big. I'm talking about this next scenario, and that was Lake Erie. This next scenario was on Lake Ontario, another great lake, and I'm guessing these waves were probably in the 12-foot class. And what the deal was, it was practice for a Bassmaster Invitational up there. This has probably been 25 or 30 years ago. And I ran from what's the name of that place there? It's in Clayton, New York. I can't remember the name of the marina there, but I ran out from Clayton, New York, out into Lake Ontario and around into an area called Chameau Bay, which is a famous area over there. And once I got in there, the wind, it was a little choppy going in. The wind was blowing like maybe, I don't know, 10 or 15 miles an hour, which when it comes out of the west-southwest on Lake Ontario, it was sort of coming more out of the west. It's pretty rough. I mean, there were 5 and 6 footers running out there, but when you come out of the river and make a left, you could run the troughs all the way through it to Chameau Bay. So I was just sort of cruising through those 5 and 6 footers. They weren't close. Wasn't any problem at all. But the wind started building on the way back. I mean, that afternoon. And by the afternoon, it was blowing probably 25 or so. And anyway, I came out of Chameau Bay there and took a right to try to get back in the river up there. And when I hit that main lake coming out of there, that's when those giants were up there. They started rolling in, and these were 8 to 12 footers. I mean, some of them were 8 footers, some of them were 12 footers. They were a little bit closer together. I'm going to say that they were almost twice as close together as the ones that were on Lake Erie. So you had to be a lot more careful with it. I mean, it was like, it was a little bit more dangerous of a situation than the Lake Erie tournaments. But that was my first experience in those giant waves. And in that tournament, I had a 17 and a half foot boat. I had an old Ranger 350. So I went through that in a 17 and a half foot boat. And that was quite an experience there, because I'd never seen anything like that coming from Missouri. That was my first experience in truly giant waves like that. But guys, those weren't dangerous. I did not feel like I was in danger at all. The only time that I felt like I was in some element of danger was at Lake Murray I can't remember if it was a Bassmaster Top 150. Might have been a Bassmaster Top 150. And this was probably, this is pushing 20, 25 years ago in Lake Murray. It was quite a long time ago. And it was the second day of practice, and I was on the east side of the lake over there. The lake, you got the east side of the lake, and then you got the main part of the lake coming over to the west there. And it was one of those days in practice. There was high wind warnings out, and we had some type of a weird, bizarre wind shear front come in. And it, all of a sudden at about 11 o'clock in the morning, it started blowing like 50 to 60 miles an hour. I'm talking close to 60. It was like the trees were bending over, unbelievable. And I had launched down by the dam. My truck was down there, and I only ran up the lake maybe 5 or 7 miles, and I was the east side of the lake. I wasn't that far away. And it was blowing so hard that you couldn't even fish. I mean, you could literally hardly stand up in the boat. And I said, well, man, I got to get, the area that I was fishing, there was nowhere to really fish. So I've got to get into some more protected water. So I said, well, I'm going to try to run straight across the lake. And the wind, the way the wind was coming down, it was sort of blowing out of the northeast. So it was coming from north to south, and I had to run west. So I knew that I could run the trough straight across. So I didn't think it'd be any problem. It wasn't that far over there. It was maybe, if you guys have been to Lake Murray, it was maybe a couple miles across there. Guys, I got out into that main lake there, out of the bay that I was in, and the waves were like probably, I'm going to say 5 to 6 feet tall. But in my entire fishing career ever, I have never seen waves that were stacked so tight together. Now you got to figure these were 5 and 6 foot waves, and every single one of them, it was so windy. The wind was blowing 60. Every one of them were breaking over the top. So what would happen is I was out in it. I couldn't do anything about it. So I got halfway out in there, and all of a sudden I was running the troughs, and I'd come up on top of a wave, and the water would just come over in my boat. It was blowing so hard that it would just like drench me in my boat. I'm talking about water coming over into the boat, not spray. I'm talking about like dumping a 55-gallon, barrel of water in the boat, that type of stuff. And I couldn't keep going like that. It was so intense. So I turned the boat with the waves, and I started like surfing a little bit with the waves. And at this point, I was only going like 10 miles an hour. I was just trying to keep the boat from getting swamped. And I could see there was an island about a half a mile in the middle of the lake. There was like a big island. And I knew that if I could get around on that south part of the island, I could get out of the wind. So anyway, I started surfing down with them. And the whole time I got water coming over the back of the boat. I got the bilges on. There's water in the floor of the boat. And I finally get on the back side of that island. I stayed there until dark. It never stopped blowing. It was blowing 50 and 60 miles an hour. And finally, right about dark, it dropped down to about 30 miles an hour. And I made it back in and put the boat on the trailer. But that was the most radical waves I have ever seen in my life. And you wouldn't think of a place like a smaller lake like Lake Murray, and that's saying a lot, guys, because like I said, I have fished every big lake in this country for 40 plus years. I've been in the most severe storms, water spouts, lightning storms, this and that. And those are the 3 times that stood out of all of the thousands of days I've been out there on the water. So anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed the story, and we'll talk later. See you.